Welcome to the Resilience Report, where each week we share the latest on companies engaging in inspirational solutions for our planet and engage with ecopreneurs and lighthouse leaders disrupting their respective industries in pursuit of better, more resilient business. I'm your host, Lauren Scott. Thank you for joining me as we dive into this week's report. Listeners of the Resilience Report are clearly looking for a podcast on finance because every time we have a guest on, the reaction is always so positive. And one angle we have yet to dive into, but that impacts each and every one of us, is that of banking. But with greenwashing really being a concern in this space, I wanted to find an organization that truly walks the walk, which is where I came across one of the fastest growing banks in the US, who also happens to deeply believe in banking like tomorrow depends on it. Climate First Bank. This digital community bank is on a mission to combat the climate crisis by making sustainable alternatives accessible to everyone. Joining us on the show to share more is Lauren Dubé, who holds possibly one of the coolest titles, VP and Director of All Things Good at Climate First Bank. Lauren leads the bank's ESG initiatives and is responsible for managing client and community relationships and seeking out beneficial partnerships. Dubé has spent the majority of her career in values-based banking. She was invited to join Climate First Bank's inaugural team by founder and CEO Ken LaRoe, initially as vice president and executive project manager. Dubé previously spent 5 years at Beneficial State Bank, a B Corp values-based bank in California. Before that, she worked at LaRoe's first values-based bank, First Green Bank. In 2021, Dubé was named one of Green Builder's next-generation influencers for working to bring sustainability to the forefront of public consciousness. In this episode, us Laurens dive deep into the exciting world of community banks and their impact on sustainability, especially compared to traditional banking. We discuss how Climate First Bank is leading the charge in supporting local businesses, nonprofits, and sustainability projects, and how their unique approach is changing the game with innovative solar lending technology. We also chat about the challenges and strategies in navigating ESG in today's political climate, the significance of B Corp certification, including some great tips to get started if you or your business are interested in getting certified, a really cool app that can help us all put our money where our values are, and so much more. So whether you're a finance enthusiast or a sustainability advocate, stay tuned as we explore how your money can work for both your wallet and the planet.
Welcome back to the Resilience Report. We're going to have an excellent episode that crosses the border between two topics that we love on this show, sustainability and finance. But before we do so, I actually want to point out a connection I have with my next guest, which she's probably not aware of. You all know my name is Lauren Scott. Interesting fact, I'm based up in Quebec, Canada. And in Quebec, we actually don't take our husband's name when we get married. It's just the way it is in this province. But when I got married a few years ago, I married a man with a family name Dubé. And so technically my name anywhere outside of Quebec would be Lauren Dubé. And my in-laws, while they spend half their time in Quebec, actually spend the other half of the time in Florida. So today we have Lauren Dubé from Florida joining us on this show. I don't think we're related, but I'm really excited to have you on the show.
I don't know. My family is from Quebec, so it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Well, welcome to the show. You might be related to my husband.
Yeah, we should take that offline.
Exactly. Well, as I promised, we're going to get back into finance, and I love always starting off a little bit higher up and more at a macro level, because we do have a lot of folks who are from the finance world. We also have listeners from all different backgrounds. So this might seem like a very, very basic question, but when we talk about banks, there are more of the classic institutional banks, and then there's also this world of community banks. Could you help us understand the nuance between the two?
Yeah. Well, I think especially if your listeners are, finance professionals, but for those that aren't, I think sometimes just backing up and really exploring like what the banking, system looks like at a really simple level, which is like us as individuals have idle cash. That idle cash you most likely have sitting in a bank, unless it's in your mattress. But for the dollars that are sitting with banks, they're using those for their lending practices. And not that, my dollars go to specific loans that I want to see, but rather I'm funding a bank's overall lending practices. So if I disagree with how that bank is, lending their money, or it doesn't align with my values, I'm still invested in it. I'm still funding it. So I think when we talk about like traditional banks then versus community banks, it's what are our deposit dollars really doing? I mean, there's obviously a purpose for traditional big banks, but I think, at least for me and my value set, community banks, I'm here in Orlando. I have, small businesses in town that I love to support. And when I bank at a community bank, I know that the dollars that I'm earning locally are also being invested back in my community locally, since community banks primarily have a lending practice that funds their local communities as well as opposed to, the financial economy at large.
That's super helpful. Thank you. And apologies again to our finance listeners this is the basics, but to catch everybody up. And I guess I wear a dual hat in my professional role outside the podcast, where part of what I do is sustainability, but the other part is marketing. And the marketing hat in me loves the tagline of Climate First Bank, which is bank like tomorrow depends on it. And maybe to start things off, you touched on that lightly, but can we start by looking at how maybe traditional banks have fallen short when it comes to this future-looking, environmental impact-looking way about banking?
Yeah, I think, at least most of your podcast listeners would agree that, climate change is real. Like, we see it in a lot of our day-to-day, especially me here in Florida, who gets hit with, really impactful hurricanes. I used to live in California, where there was, weeks where I couldn't go outside without proper, masking protection, so breathing in smoke. So it's always been a really real part of, my life as dealing with these effects of climate change. I mean, I literally don't take my dog for walks in the middle of the day because of the extreme heat here in Florida. So we know that climate change is an issue from a scientific point of view, but what we're finding is that for a lot of times, those traditional larger banks are still heavily invested in the fossil fuel industry. Obviously, there's still a heavy reliance on fossil fuels and therefore a need to lend to them. But what we're seeing is that those lending activities continue to increase. They're not backing down. So for us at Climate First Bank, it was going back to the whole, me as a consumer with a set of values. What bank am I supporting their lending practices? Or then for us, Climate First Bank becomes that option for folks that do believe in climate change, want to see more investments go into projects like renewable energy, solar panels, the greenification of infrastructure, and want a place to align those deposit dollars with their values. So when we say bank like tomorrow depends on it, it quite literally does, because we're trying to create a movement in which more investments are going towards projects that are needed most.
You're definitely disrupting a very traditional industry. Maybe if we can speak to the genesis of the Climate First Bank coming to be, it is clearly a very different model. If you can maybe speak to that a little bit more about what makes it so different than maybe what most of our listeners are used to when we're talking about banking.
Yeah, it might be helpful for me to tell just a little bit of a story on how Climate First Bank was founded.
Sure.
Our founder, CEO Ken LaRoe, actually started a bank a while ago. It was called First Green Bank. That was here in Florida. And First Green Bank had a very similar mission, and it was sold. And that mission didn't stay a part of our community. So he was actually reading a book called Project Drawdown that obviously details a lot of the projects and initiatives that would actually draw down carbon from our atmosphere, and was like, what if we paired climate solutions to these initiatives? There was a disconnect between we know what some of those solutions are, but where's the financing for them? Where's the capital for those projects? So that was a big reason why Climate First Bank was started. Was one, Ken had kind of had it in his heart to create this model for change in the finance industry that didn't really get a chance to stick around, and saw that we know what to do. It's just putting the capital behind it. So when we talk about what makes Climate First Bank different, it's really that. It's how do we shift capital in the direction of projects that are important to our future, and how we transition to renewable energies or have more, EV charging infrastructure or greener buildings. So for us, it's all about how we invest in projects in those spaces, as well as educate those that are coming along for the ride and things that they can do in their own businesses or own day-to-day lives to be more sustainable.
And in terms of your customer base, I'm sure there's individuals like you and I who would be able to go, but Climate First Bank also has a focus on supporting NGOs as well as businesses in the sustainability space. Can you speak to those profiles? Maybe I think most of us are used to how we bank as individuals, but what that looks like for those two groups.
I think when we talk about our community, if you were to describe where you live or suggest places that you like to visit or take friends when they come into town, it's almost always small business. Your favorite restaurants, your favorite shops, small businesses really are what make up our communities, and of course the individuals in our communities, as well as the nonprofits that support a variety of different needs specific to those communities. So for us, supporting nonprofits and small businesses was how do we literally provide capital and support to like the largest makeup of our communities. I keep saying the word communities a ton, but but yeah, so for us it was how do we make our products more transparent and fair, so we're not price gouging. We're trying to make sure that when we bring on a nonprofit or a small business, that they literally have all of the banking tools they need to be successful. So we don't have like minimum balance requirements or monthly service fees. We have lenders and an underwriting team that really tries to help nonprofits and small businesses with potential lending needs or financial coaching on how to get them to that next level. We have a small business administration department, an SBA department that specializes in helping small businesses access capital. So yeah, when we talk about being a community bank, it would seem silly that we weren't providing a ton of resources and most of our focus into those two areas.
I love that accessibility angle. I think it's so important to tie it back to your favorite word, community, but to make it available to those different groups, that absolutely makes sense. And I know one other concern that often bubbles up, I think probably in light of what we saw with a lot of different smaller banks over the past couple of years, is that of insurance. And the Climate First Bank is actually, if I'm not mistaken, the first FDIC insured community bank. For our listeners who are less familiar with what that means, could you help us run through, I guess, the meaning of that, but why that's also really important?
We're seeing a lot in the space right now where you have different banking models of what they call neobanks or fintech banks. And so for us, being like a standalone FDIC insured bank was something I think worth acknowledging. A lot of those neobanks are plugged into another FDIC insured bank, but which is then just a small chunk of what that larger bank is doing. So for us to say as a full-scale FDIC insured bank to be doing this work is kind of helping to set this stage of this model of how we want to see banking shift, and for it to be done at a level like we're doing it. I mean, FDIC insurance is obviously extremely important. We have to keep our deposit dollars safe, and not only do we do that by being FDIC insured, but it was also really important for us then to have, the regulation and accountability that comes with that. We don't just get to operate in like a fintech space. We're operating with other, national banks that are FDIC insured and setting an example to them as well.
And I'm sure that has played a part of it. But Climate First Bank is actually one of the fastest growing banks in the country, which is an amazing accomplishment. What do you credit that to? Is it that community angle, the maybe the trust in the bank itself? It seems like a really remarkable path.
I would say it's really all about our mission. I think that's really set us apart in this space. I mean, there's, new banks, there's been community, banks that have opened here in the state of Florida. And I think our mission really set us apart, not only to, consumers and those, folks trying to find a new bank. It's helped us acquire some really incredible talent. I mean, I work with an absolutely amazing team who I think is, works exceptionally hard because we're working towards something bigger than just making profit for a bank. We're working on a larger mission, and how we bring value to our stakeholders and not just our shareholders. And stakeholders obviously meaning like our community, actually my favorite word, our employees, our customers, our supply chains, and of course, planet Earth, which we all depend on. So I think that mission is kind of, if you were to take any segment of what we're doing and how it's growing, that's really at the core, at the heart of it, as to I think why we've been so successful just in 3 years.
I love that shift that you're talking about from purely shareholders to the full value chain of stakeholders. So that's an important nuance. And part of that growth that you've seen is definitely linked with your mission, as you were saying. So you are based in Florida and Sunshine State. It obviously makes a lot of sense that your bank is directly linked with a lot of solar projects specifically, and offers a couple of different options that I don't think are necessarily very traditional through a bank. Could you speak to how the organization has been supporting the transition towards renewables within the state?
So we actually have a sister company called One Ethos, or Climate First Bank and One Ethos are under the same holding company. So they actually developed technology for Climate First Bank in order to, provide an application process or a whole loan process really that helps us be able to do solar lending at scale. We kind of leveraged technology to be able to, instead of just getting applications from people as they come into the door, to having a technology platform that we can share with all of the solar installers here in the state of Florida. So I think as of end of last year, we had supported 1,870 households in a transition to solar energy. So we have that to our advantage of leveraging technology in order to do this at scale. But we also created a product that I think is pretty revolutionary, if you will. I think solar has kind of it's had a bad rap at times. And a lot in part because it's not always been a transparent product. So you have some financial products that maybe advertise a really low interest rate, but there's a financing fee, or what they call a dealer fee, that gets tacked on. So you're paying 20-30% more for solar than you really should be, just to kind of get that poster rate. So for us, it was important to just automatically right off the gate say we're not going to charge those financing fees or those dealer fees. So that way, the price of the system is the price of the system. We're very upfront with what our rate is. We amortize that over, is it 25 or 30 years now for residential solar lending? So the goal being that as utility rates are increasing, that you can essentially replace that utility bill with a stable solar loan payment. So if I'm paying, $200 for electricity here in 2024, which might increase to, $250 in the years to come, if I locked in a solar loan rate at, $175 a month, I have that ability to save money in the future. And I also have that stability. Not to mention, if you have all the battery backups and stuff, not getting to lose power during a hurricane is a nice advantage too. But yeah, I think it's the product, it's our, technology partner. And it's really helped us do this at scale in a way that I think it's transparent and it's fair, and it actually has an advantage, or provides an advantage to our customers that we're serving as well.
And I'd love to double click just into that. And admittedly, I'm based in an area where we have 100% hydro. So I'm very much less familiar with how that would work from a solar project standpoint. When we're talking about solar loans, that's the loan that, let's say, as an individual or a business, I would take to finance the actual installation? Or is it a loan that goes feeding that energy back into the grid? What does that look like? I'm just less familiar with that format.
Yeah, here in Florida, we do have net metering, meaning if I had, solar on my roof, I produce what I use. But if I produce extra, I can actually sell that back to the grid. And then when maybe it's today, it's pretty cloudy here. So if I'm not producing enough electricity to meet my needs, just because the sun's not shining as bright as it usually does, I can purchase electricity from the grid. So sometimes I'm kind of when I need it, I can use it. And when I don't need it, I can sell it. And at the end of the day, that's hopefully, balance out to a place where I'm not, paying the utility companies extra. But here in Florida, at least, we have a energy mix of, nuclear and coal and solar and stuff. So I couldn't tell you exactly because it's not a utility expert, but we're definitely not 100% anything renewables.
I would love to pick your brain to being based in Florida. The topic of ESG can certainly be polarizing, and I would say absolutely politicized, especially in a year like 2024. How have you navigated that as in your specific role, and also just part of Climate First Bank, of just navigating what can maybe be a little bit of a sensitive topic, and then especially in an industry that's maybe not as used to talking about this kind of topic?
Well, we certainly had a hard time with it. I mean, our name kind of really speaks for itself and draws a lot of attention, sometimes very wanted attention, and sometimes maybe not so wanted attention. I think I talk a lot personally about the term belonging, and how at the end of the day, we all just want to belong. So for me, it's been, and I think for us as an organization, has really been about finding common ground with people who might not agree with our mission or might not agree with how we view climate change. But there's always something that links us, especially when it comes to the environment. Since we're in Florida, I mean, we're obviously have a huge tourism industry here that relies on beautiful beaches and clean waterways. We have, individuals here that like to hunt and therefore are really passionate about land conservation. I think when we find those things that unite us and give us that sense of belonging, like we are in this together, that's really, I think, what helps us navigate this landscape, is that when we find that common ground and just, can create the conversation around that and how their values maybe at the end of the day do match with our own, we actually start having really productive conversations. And for us as a bank, has helped us, find a really diverse group of customers and, shareholders too. We're definitely not a bank completely led or owned by Democrats. So we have a really lovely mix of individuals, and I think it's all because we've tried to find what we're all most passionate about. And really, at the end of the day, if you kind of maybe take the terms climate change out of it sometimes, we all do really care about the environment that we thrive on. So that for us, I think, has been how we've navigated it. I mean, we've tried to get a little bit more into talking about some of the research and, maybe potentially negative impacts of some of the anti-ESG bills that have come here through the state. So we're trying to use our voice a little bit more there. It's hard when you're a state-regulated bank to have a strong stance against the state itself. But we have incredible partners here, as well as other values-aligned businesses that, we're trying to create a united voice as to why we think some of these bills are more damaging to our local economies and small businesses. But yeah, I always go back to that term belonging, of just finding common ground with each other.
And there is so much common ground, and I completely agree with you. And sometimes we're so used to just reading headlines that gets a little bit more challenging. But when you can have the long form discussion with your stakeholders, I think that's absolutely achievable. And I know when we're looking at companies that are more values-based, like your own, one of the real stamps of approval that I think a lot of us trust is that of the B Corp certification. And that is an angle that you've taken on with Climate First Bank. For our listeners who are less familiar with B Corp, could you maybe speak to what that organization is, especially to you, and then why it was important for Climate First Bank to get that certification?
Yeah, you've definitely hit my favorite subject area now. The last bank I worked for was also a certified B Corporation. So I've been part of this B Corp community for a while now. But for those that don't know what a certified B Corporation is, it really started out as a movement. And there's a nonprofit called B Lab who actually controls the certification body. But the whole goal was just, capitalism obviously has, most, if not all, of the power of the world. So how do we shift capitalism for good? How do we shift business for good? So the certifications came out as a way of helping a business, one, just as a tool in and of itself. So as a small business that wanted to really explore what it means to use your business for good, it's a great resource. It's free to use. And then to go through the certification process, it really digs into a business's practices across how they treat their workers, their involvement in the community, their impacts on the planet, how fair and transparent their products and services are, what does their supply chain look like? I mean, it really digs in to every aspect of your business, and at times highlights the really great things that you're doing and also sheds light on maybe where you're falling short. So once you go through that assessment, it's about 250 questions. You have to get a score of at least 80, which I know 80 out of 250 kind of seems like, oh, that's not too bad. But every question's worth 0.1 point or 0.5 points. So 80 is actually really, it's a challenge to achieve. I think they say if a typical business goes through the B Corp certification process, they average around 50. So
No.
to get to that 30-point jump, you really have to be doing some incredible things with your business model. And then it's actually like heavily like audited. So we actually got assigned a B Lab representative that went through our complete assessment, asked for proof for what we selected yes to, or what we had for certain answers, and made sure that we were being honest with how we were presenting ourselves in that assessment. So we originally had said like, yeah, we were going to get 111 points. And then by the time we were done with that auditing process, had fallen down to 98.6, which I know sounds like, oh man, like what did you do to fall short? But really, I think that speaks to how rigorous that assessment is and how trusted it is as a label. So if you haven't, looked up what a certified B Corporation is, I'd encourage you to like Google it and, find what that logo looks like, because once you see that logo, you'll probably start noticing it other places like your Ben & Jerry's ice cream or your Patagonia wear, or like I'll look for it now when I go to like the grocery store and see if I can find B Corp brands to purchase from. But my favorite thing overall, and I promise I'll stop talking about B Corps unless you want me to keep going, is the community. And I think that's what really makes that, you get the certification and you get this kind of acknowledgement that you're not greenwashing with your business, but the community that forms with B Corp supporting other B Corps, the best practice sharing, the like, hey, like I'm having a really hard time just like with the state of the world and like, what are you doing right now at your company or you as an individual? You really get to connect as humans that are working towards a bigger cause together. So it's a really special movement for me.
Well, I actually would love for you to speak about it a little bit more, because as you're speaking, we have a lot of listeners who are maybe more the small to medium-sized organizations, and they're thinking about B Corp. I know that it's a lift, especially if you're talking about the number of questions, with each question being a 0.1%. How, it sounds like it's worth it, but how would you maybe guide an organization or an entrepreneur who's thinking of approaching B Corp for the first time?
Yeah, well, I would first say like it's okay to join the community even if you're not officially B Corp certified yet. So if you are be curious, as we say, there's a lot of actually what they call B local communities. So here in Florida, we have Florida for Good, which is a business group of values-aligned businesses across the state, B Corp or not. But there's also different B local groups in different regions of the states as well as Canada. So I would encourage you to like tap into that resource and that network. I think you'll find people very excited to meet you and share resources and tools and ideas. When we were first starting the bank, like I was reaching out to some of my resources like, hey, like what did you write in your HR policy about like benefits or whatever? And just like how eager people are to share what they're working on with you. So I would say great first step is always connecting with your local community. And if you don't have one, you can always say hey to me. And there also are a ton of B Corp consultants out there as well that can actually, guide you through that work, especially if you don't feel like you have the resources internally to tackle a project like that. There's some incredible B Corp consultants out there that would gladly help you through that certification process.
I would echo that outside consultants can sometimes be that little bit of a aid when you're trying to get some of these off the ground. And I love that term, be curious. Another organization that you're partnered with is the Global Alliance of Banking for Values. Is that correct? And maybe if you can speak to that a little bit more, because that's one I'm definitely less familiar with, but I'm very encouraged to hear that there is a values-based push within the banking space.
The Global Alliance for Banking on Values. I have to get my ons and fours in the right place sometimes too. Yeah, that's another really special network. GABV for short, so it's not a mouthful every time, is a global network of banks that want to see the financial system change for good. So my favorite part of the GABV is that you have, banks like ours here in the States. You have like larger European banks. You have banks in Africa. You have banks that are, micro lending institutions. You have banks in Asia. And it's obviously all those financial systems are very different, but there's a lot of best practices to be shared. So it brings together this like global group of, financial change makers to share best practices and just unite as a community and how we can collectively use our voice. There's also a North American chapter that we're a part of. And it's not something you can just sign on to, kind of like the B Corp certification process. There is like a scorecard you go through. You do have to demonstrate that your bank is primarily lending to the real economy versus the financial economy. So, tangible goods and services. So we're actually going through that. We've been an associate member for a little while now, and we're actually going through the process of becoming a full member, where we really start digging into the aspects of our lending portfolio to demonstrate the percentages that actually go towards real economy activity. And they also focus on the triple bottom line. So not just prioritizing profits, but equally balancing that with people and planet as well. It's a really special network. And it's nice to have like the B Corp community, where you're talking about businesses that, create, physical products and services to consultants, to banks, and then another community that's kind of just for the financial system, where we could really enact change in this area that so desperately needs it.
I love that too, because I think that if we're going to make this work, we're going to have to work beyond our organization thing. We're always so competitive, but it's going to take that cross collaboration for sure. You definitely light up when you talk about partnerships. Are you working on any specific projects that you're really excited about and that you can share?
Well, we just launched our 2023 impact report. So that one was something, it's like my favorite, but also like least favorite project I work on every year. It just takes so much time and energy, but it's so much fun to work through. And I have some incredible, teammates that we come together and get to collaborate on every year. So just launching that was exciting. And we have some projects of, I guess, like webinars and stuff to talk about how other small businesses or even banks can, report out in the same way. But as it relates to impact reports, and I hope I don't get in trouble for sharing this because I don't think it's that top secret, but we've been working on, so with our financial partner, One Ethos, or with our technology partner, One Ethos, we've been working on kind of a impact report through your online banking experience. So essentially what it would look like is, you have a personal account at Climate First Bank and you're out there swiping your debit card, or you have this much money in your checking account. And what we're hoping that we'll have is an app within your online banking app that'll show kind of the impacts of your deposit dollars. So while they're sitting here at Climate First Bank, what kind of projects are those deposits getting lent against? Like going back to agreeing with the bank's lending practices, we want to be really transparent about what we're lending to. So we've been diving in a little bit to stuff beyond just solar and renewable energy projects, but talking about how much, affordable housing we do, how much investment we do in the healthy food space, or how many women or Black-owned businesses we're supporting. So it'll kind of give you a snapshot of what the bank's overall lending portfolio looks like. We've also been diving into calculating the actual carbon footprint of that lending portfolio. So what does it look like for your deposits versus this overall carbon footprint of our portfolios? And the other cool part about it would be that as you swipe your card places, it'll tell you if that purchase actually aligned with your values. So if you had said, hey, I really enjoy supporting small businesses or women-owned businesses, it would tell you hey, this maybe purchase didn't align with your values, but here's some suggestions of other places you could have shopped. Or hey, thumbs up, it did actually align with your values. You shopped at a B Corp. So we've kind of had it in the testing phase, I think, for a little while. And we're excited to see how that kind of really helps continue the education of the impacts that we have as consumers and businesses that are banking, not just with Climate First Bank, but really kind of making that connection of voting with your wallet. There's a lot of power in your pocket, as I've heard some folks say. So you make sure you're using it for good. And this app is supposed to help people in that educational journey.
That's so cool. I would definitely, on a selfish level, I'm asking because I would love to have this. But from my understanding, then Climate First Bank is primarily and only based in Florida. Is that correct?
No, actually, we have clients in 49 states and Puerto Rico. The only state we don't have a customer in is Alaska. So if anyone's listening from Alaska, I'll send you a gift basket if you want to open it so that we can say a full 50 states. But yeah, actually we just had our 3-year anniversary. So we've actually started really growing our nationwide presence, which it's kind of funny to talk about going nationwide, but also talk about being a community bank. And actually one of the pages of our impact reports talks about, our communities are local, but our community is also people who kind of share our values and want to support the mission of the bank. So kind of expanding that idea of community as well as we go nationwide.
That's really exciting. I'm guessing it's very complicated to cross the border, but at least you're across the US. So that's fantastic. And you're obviously so passionate about sustainability. Was this something from day one in your career you knew that you wanted it to be woven into what you were doing, or is it more of a gradual progression?
Oh gosh. So I guess to give you the short version of my story and how I got into values aligned banking, actually one of my very first jobs out of college was at Chase Bank, and it was a great place I was able to receive, healthcare as a part-time employee, but I really just didn't like the financial banking system. I was like, this is not a career path for me, but it was kind of what I needed to, get myself through college. And I was ready to just, find something different. And one of my coworkers had recently left for Ken's second bank, First Green Bank, which I mentioned. And he was like, I think you should apply for a job here. I think you'd like it. It's different. And I was like, no, I don't want to work in the banking industry anymore. He's like, no, this is different. We're trying to use the bank for good and support, environmental projects and small business. And I was like, well, kind of didn't have anything else lined up. And I was like, sure. So I applied and I started working there. And actually during my time there, I got recruited to move to California with my partner, and also didn't think that I was going to be really staying in the banking industry, but I got the opportunity to work for a bank out there called Beneficial State Bank, which is another, GABV B Corp bank. And my time there really inspired me to stay in this kind of values-aligned banking space. There's, such power in banking, and being able to wield that for good feels good. And I learned a lot there. I worked there for 5 years before Ken recruited me to come help start Climate First Bank. So I've been in values-aligned banking for 10 years now. So at the beginning of that 10 years, if you told me I'm still going to be working for a bank, I probably would have laughed at you. But now I really can't see myself working in any other space. It's been fun I started off as a teller and then got the opportunity to work in commercial sales, where I was selling the mission of the bank, to now working at Climate First and really getting the opportunity to steer our mission and how we do good. My title recently got changed to Director of All Good Things, which was fun.
The coolest title I think I've ever seen.
I was skeptical about it at first, but everyone has just told me the same thing. So, but it's been a fun journey, and I'm happy to be continuing this work in my home state. So, was never really the intention, but I'm glad I ended up where I am now.
And sometimes when we're working in this space, while it can be so exciting, I know sometimes it can feel a little bit heavy, or like you're pushing a boulder up a hill every single day. How do you keep yourself energized so that you can recommit to the work on a regular basis?
Oh, that's a great question, especially in a year of an election.
Mm-hmm.
I find a lot of times it can be as simple as just going outside and really appreciating what you're working so hard to protect, even if it's just stepping in my backyard. And today I had a hummingbird in my backyard, which was really exciting. So sometimes it's as simple as just reconnecting with what at the end of the day we're really working on. I think it's so easy to get lost in emails and projects, but that reconnection really helps. And then to go back to, I guess, my two favorite words of this podcast, community and belonging, is when I get a chance to reconnect with those communities where I feel like I show up authentically, that for me just is an immediate reset button. Being part of the B Corp community, getting to attend networking events with other sustainability professionals, where, I get to show up as Lauren, the sustainability enthusiast, and not Lauren, the banker. That is always really good for the soul. And then kind of, gets you to be okay, I can keep going.
Those are all amazing tips of just kind of reconnecting to our why. And if our listeners would love to hear more about Climate First Bank, maybe they're in one of those states, or maybe we have that token Alaska-based person who wants to join, where would you recommend they check out?
Well, on our website, we have some incredible fireside chats. So if you wanted to listen to some of the conversations we've had with other incredible leaders that are way cooler than myself, including Dr. Jane Goodall. So we have some incredible conversations that we've had the opportunity to share with our team and our community. Our website's full of information. I really hope you check out our new impact report. And as always, you can find me on LinkedIn. And if you ever want to talk about anything that has to do with banking, sustainability, B Corps, I'm your girl.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so informative for those of us who are less in the finance space and banking space. But I think even for those of us who are in it, it's just that refresher and to learn more about how you're disrupting the industry. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. I'm really excited to hear more about this app as that gets launched and introduced to the market. We like to end every episode with the same question, which we would love your perspective on, which is, what do you think it will take for businesses and leaders to be resilient going forward?
That's a great question. And I see the tie-in of why you ask it every episode. I guess it really depends on how you define resiliency. And I think it's one thing to say, oh, what do I need to pick myself up and keep going? Or what do I need to do to navigate this changing landscape? What do I need to do to be resilient against changing weather patterns? But I think for businesses and leaders, I think it's really going back to just finding out what's your why and reconnecting with that every chance that you feel like you need it. I mean, I think anytime I'm struggling with keeping going in this work, or even us as a business, how do we make this next big decision of a big project or a big move? Every time we connect to that why, I think really grounds us in a way that we can keep going forward. And especially when that why is rooted on something bigger than just making a profit. I think that's probably the biggest key, is that we can't just be about profitability anymore. It's important because businesses that are doing good need to stay in business. But when your why is bigger than just making money, I think that's the key.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lauren. This has been fantastic.
Likewise. Thank you so much for hosting me. I can't wait to figure out if we're related or not.
Same here.
I hope that you've enjoyed this week's edition of the Resilience Report. If you would like to hear and see more, be sure to check out @The Resilience Report on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until we connect again, remember, even on the darkest of days, we all have the opportunity to be a lighthouse for others as we collectively pursue better, more resilient business.